Good morning, UVF. I am so honored to be up here and sharing in front of you guys today. I've been waiting for this for a long time, hoping that I would get the chance to address you all, and so I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I just have a couple people that I would like to thank before going forward. I know that if I were to list everyone by name, I would probably be up here the entire time, just listing people who have poured into me while I'm here at Valley Forge. So instead, I just wanted to kind of call you out by group. So I have been deeply impacted, and I would like to thank all of my professors and the faculty and staff here who have poured into me. You've walked with me through some really hard times, and you've taught me so much. I'd like to thank all of my friends on campus who have always supported me through everything. I'd like to thank my church at GCC, where, like they said, it's become like family there. I'd like to thank my home church who have supported me through everything. Even some of them are watching online right now. And I would like to thank my family, lastly, but most importantly, because they've really walked with me through some hard times, and I haven't always been around for some things for them because I've been here at school, but they've always loved me. First off, to my older sister, Emily, she was actually one of the reasons why I came here, and she's been my role model my entire life, someone I always looked up to. My sister, Claire, for being the most patient roommate I could have ever asked for while growing up, and my brothers, Scott and Joey, for teaching me how to play every sport except basketball. And lastly, to my parents for their love and support and for always being there for me. I have a picture of my family that I wanted to show to you guys because I figured you only get to speak in chapel once, and if you get that opportunity, you need to show everyone what your siblings look like. So this is us, obviously a long time ago. I'm the only blonde one in the picture. I stood out a little bit growing up. We clearly had great fashion sense. We were like ahead of the times with the bucket hats. And I love Scott. Shout out to you if you're watching online, which you better be. I love your socks in this picture. It actually it adds, I think, a level of character and depth. But yeah, we were pretty close growing up. We were homeschooled, so we got to spend a lot of time together, which I loved. But don't let their cute faces deceive you, because I'm telling you, we were sometimes good, but my parents can tell you that we were mischievous. Emily was normally the ringleader, right? So as the oldest, she found out about things before the rest of us, which obviously could turn wrong very quickly. I remember on April 1st one year, she discovered such a thing as April Fool's Day, in which you could pull pranks on people and get away with it, and you couldn't get in trouble. That's what we thought. She would have us do things like, if you salt someone's toothbrush, oh my gosh. It's just we'll ruin their day. Or and then we took it a step further, and it always seemed to be with the condiments. So I remember one day I came downstairs, and we always had our cups of water sitting on the table, and I go to take a drink out of mine, and it's salty, extremely salty, and apparently my brother had just poured salt into my drink while I wasn't there. But probably the most diabolical thing that they have ever taught, my sister has ever taught us, is how to rubber band the kitchen sprayer. They are the reason I have trust issues when I'm getting a drink of water, because you never know. You always have to check if it's rubber banded, because you could turn on the water and get a bath instead, which is never fun. And it carried on like this for a while until one day I decided that I was going to get my brother back for getting me. So he had rubber banded the sprayer, I had gotten soaked, and so had the whole kitchen. And I rubber banded the sprayer, and then I just waited. I was upstairs. I was just listening, waiting for him to scream, which is not really kind of me. I'm a great sister. But what I heard was not what I expected to hear, because my mom happened to be the next one to get a drink of water. Okay, so it goes something like this. Sophia Lynn Benco! Screaming from downstairs. And I'm like, oh no, what have I done? But we were all fine. She didn't punish us too much because my whole siblings had been doing it for a while. But I learned you can never be too careful getting a drink of water at the Benco house. But if my siblings were the reason why I had no trust for anyone, then my parents, as I got older, slowly became the reason why I have trust for people today. Because as I get older and as I moved away to college and stuff, I knew that I could always call them if I needed anything. I could always talk to them about anything that was on my mind or on my heart. And I think probably the number one reason that I called them while I was in school is because my car broke down, which regrettably, that shouldn't be the case. They probably didn't want it. But I knew that if I called my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, the car's not working again. It's making a funny sound," he would be like, "Okay, can you put the phone down to the car? I'll listen to the engine." And normally he's able to diagnose it in like 10 seconds because he's a genius. And it went on like this. My car broke down probably like 6 times while I'm here at school. Yeah. And one time he actually drove 5 hours across the state to replace my battery and my transmission? Alternator. I was so close. I don't know cars. He drove all the way across the state from Pittsburgh, about an hour south, and replaced the battery and alternator in my car. And I was so, it was like I was rescued because my car ended up being stuck at a parking lot somewhere off campus, and he came and he rescued me and took me back, and it was great. But I learned that I could trust my parents for anything. And if there's one thing that I've learned here at Valley Forge, it's about the importance of trust. Not only trust for people that you know you can rely on, like your parents or your friends, but trust in God and who he is and his character. I've had a lot of seasons here at the school. Some really good, really happy, joyful seasons, and some really difficult. And I'm sure that everyone here can relate to that. Some of you right now, I'm sure, are in the dark seasons where you look ahead to the future and you don't know what's coming next, or everything that you thought was going to be in the future is now different, and your plans have all changed. And some of you are in seasons where things seem pretty good, and you're happy and you're content with life. Maybe you know what your next step is, or you're excited to come back next year to the school, or you know what you're doing instead. But regardless of what season you're in, if you don't have an anchor and a trust in the Lord, as Augustine puts it, your heart will be restless. And it's something that I've really found to be very true, that your heart is restless if it's not anchored in the Lord and in who he is. So that's what I'm going to talk to you guys today about trusting in the Lord and what it means that no matter what season you go through, that he is trustworthy through everything. I'm going to read a scripture, the one that I'm going to talk from today. It's from Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And I'm pretty sure many of you have heard this before. It's a pretty common one. But I hopefully want to draw out a couple things from it to make it mean something more. Because I know we can talk about, just trust God and it'll all work out. Just trust God and, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And we use it kind of casually sometimes. But I hope that what you get out of this today is that there's so much depth to trusting God. And there's so much security and so much hope in trusting God. So if you'll turn with me to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, it says the following: "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Sometimes we like to read this, and we like the idea that it presents to us at the end, where it says, "And he will make your paths straight." Because a lot of the times we don't know what our paths are going to be like. And we don't know what lies ahead of us, and we would like for God to just make our path straight. And what we envision normally when we think of this is just, Lord, this one thing that I'm struggling with, this one difficulty that I have in front of me, If you could just move that out of the way, then I'll trust you because I see my path will be straight. And we want him to just get rid of the difficulty before we learn to trust him. And that's what we think having straight paths is. But I want to talk to you about how that is not the case. If any of you have gone through hard times where it doesn't seem like your path is very straight, you know that your path and its straightness in God's eyes is different from what straight looks to you. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the first parts of the passage. And I'm going to break it down just sentence by sentence because they build off of each other and they make it it just makes so much sense. So the first part, what does it mean to trust in the Lord with all your heart? Okay, so what is your heart? Think about that. Like, what if I were to tell you, take heart, what does that mean to you? And have you ever experienced taking heart? Have you ever experienced encouragement? Or maybe you've experienced what it feels like to have a downcast heart, where your heart is discouraged and you feel kind of like your time is just flat, What does Proverbs define as your heart? What does it say to us about the heart? Proverbs 4:23, it says this: above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Other translations say everything that you do flows from your heart. Everything you do comes out of your heart. That's convicting because we don't always do things that we would like to admit came from our heart. We don't always think things that we would like to admit came from our heart. But it says that our heart is that important, that everything that you do comes out of your heart. And so he tells us that the first step to trusting in the Lord is trusting him with all of your heart. That central part of you where everything else, all of your life flows. Picture this. You're standing in a stream and it's running past you, right? And maybe you're standing downstream from someone. And that person in front of you suddenly begins to stomp their feet in the stream. Okay, and this kind of creates some commotion in the water, and it stirs up the mud in the water where they're standing. You're standing downstream from them, and the water carries that mud down to you. So whereas before you might have been able to see the bottom of the stream that you're standing in, and it looked really clear, and it felt really nice, now all of a sudden you're surrounded by clouds of dirt, right? So it's this idea of what they did flowed down. And the proverb is telling us that what happens in your heart flows to everything else that you do. A disturbance in one area affects everything else. That's how important it is to keep your heart centered. It's imperative that we keep our hearts centered because it flows, it affects, it has the ability to cloud up everything else that we do. Have you ever felt just burdened? And then suddenly, even little things, maybe hanging out with your friends you can't seem to do because you're thinking about something else. You're always preoccupied. Or maybe you're excited for something and you just cannot wait for the day. Like for me, it was always when I would get to go to Idlewild. That's where the picture was taken, actually. It was an amusement park. But I would just long for that day and I would be so excited. But it would overshadow everything else leading up to that week, to the point where my mom would get frustrated with us because we couldn't focus on our school. It affected everything that we did because of what we were looking forward to and what we were set on. Your heart affects everything that you do. I mentioned at the beginning that Augustine says that our hearts are restless until they find God. He says, we're reading, shout out to all my Theo 2 people, we're reading in Theo 2 Augustine's Confessions. Thank you, all 2 of you who came to chapel. It says, you have prompted him, this is speaking of God, you have prompted him, you, God, him, man, that he should delight to praise you. God, you have prompted us that we should delight to praise you. For you have made man for yourself, and restless is the human heart until it comes to rest in you. Ultimately, the ultimate sense of disturbance that happens in our heart is when it's not centered in God. How do you know if your heart isn't centered in God? Are you restless this morning? Are you anxious? Are you nervous? Are you preoccupied? Is your heart centered in God? Are you trusting him? Now, that's a lot easier said than done, to trust God with all your heart. So how do you do that? Well, the proverb goes on. It says, lean not on your own understanding. So trust the Lord with all your heart, and in that, lean not on your own understanding. You picture someone leaning, right? Maybe over an edge. It's where their weight is that they're leaning. I learned the importance of leaning when I was very young. I never thought I would have to say that sentence. But I learned how to lean well when I twisted my ankle I think it was in the wintertime, or maybe early spring. I twisted my ankle and I had to walk on crutches for a while. And I had the bright idea to go down the steps on my crutches. And they tell you don't do that, and you shouldn't. But I didn't listen, so I'm taking it. And if you've ever used crutches before, it's already kind of difficult to walk when you're just on, level ground. Now, when you're going down steps, it's a whole different game, and I thought that I had figured it out. I got, 3 steps down. My mom's laughing. She knows what's coming next. I got 3 steps down, and all of a sudden, it was like I was stuck balancing on the crutches, and I just felt myself, for 5 minutes, just teetering on the edge. And then I went down, and I fell down 12 steps, and I just remember laying there at the bottom thinking, I'm dead. How did I survive that? But I did somehow, magically, miraculously, thank God. And and I learned the importance of, I wasn't hurt, by the way. I know that it might be hard to believe, but I didn't get more injured than I was. But I learned that what you put your weight on affects where you go. If you're leaning on something that's unstable, you will fall. If you are leaning on crutches at the top of steps, you will fall all the way down. And that's what this proverb is trying to warn us about, leaning on unstable things. And you know what it says is unstable, actually, which is really interesting? It says, your own understanding is unstable. If you lean on that, you're going to fall down the steps. Isn't that wild? We learn the value of leaning when we look at the Old Testament. And we learn from our dear friends, the Israelites. We sigh, but we are just like them. I have a couple references for you guys that I want to read, and I want you to pay attention to who's leaning on what, or who's leaning on whom. Okay, so Ezekiel 29:6-7 says this. It's talking about the people of Israel and Egypt. When they, Israel, grasped you, Egypt, with their hands, you splintered and you tore open their shoulders. When they leaned on you, you broke, and their backs were wrenched. Isaiah 31:1 says, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses. Woe to them. And trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong, but they do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord. 1 Chronicles 16:7-8 says, Hanani, the seer, came to Asa, the king of Judah, and said to him, because you relied on the king of Aram and not on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Aram has escaped from your hand. So what did we see happen when the Israelites chose to rely on something other than what God had told them? Right, well, with the Egyptians, it said that the Egyptians became like a rod that splintered in their hand, and it tore open their shoulder, and just that picture of pain caused by relying on something other than God. And how often we experience the same pain Woe to those who rely, it says, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses and in chariots because they think they're strong. They're saying, look, these things in front of you that you see, you think they're strong. A lot of chariots and a lot of horses you'd think would win a war. But that's your own understanding, God says. Well, I told you something different. I did, and you can trust it. Don't stop leaning on what you see and on what you feel around you and on what your own understanding is telling you. It will cause you pain. Meanwhile, what happens when we trust in the Lord? 2 Chronicles 13:18. The men of Israel were subdued on that occasion, and the men of Judah were victorious because they relied on the Lord, the God of their fathers. They were victorious. Do you ever walk and you see the future? I know I do this. You see the future and you see what's coming up ahead of you, and you wonder, like, am I going to succeed? Am I going to do what God has called me to do? And it says they were victorious. Why? Because they relied on the Lord. Just rely on him. Again, 2 Chronicles 14:11 says, then Asa called to the Lord his God and said, listen to what he says. Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rely on you, and in your name we have come against this vast army. O Lord, you are our God. You are our God. Do not let men prevail against you. Lord, we rely on you. Don't let man prevail against you. It's the Lord. When we rely on him and when we seek his understanding, that allows us to be victorious. It sustains us. Rely not on your understanding. You have to trust that his understanding is better, and the things that he asks of you are better. See, because when we rely on our own understanding, it results in things like jealousy, because we think that what we see around us is most important. Things like discontentment in our situation, because we feel like somehow we deserve better than what we got. Impatience with ourselves, because we feel like we should have learned this lesson by now. And we should be better. But reliance upon God says, oh Lord, you already are enough. And I know that you've been guiding me and you're teaching me, so I trust that where I'm at right now is fine. It leads us to unforgiveness because we fail to see the grace that God has for both us and other people. It leads us to revenge when others hurt us because we're unable to receive healing from God. It leads us to gossip when we disagree with other people. Our own understanding results in some pretty ugly stuff. It leads us to selfishness and to using people and manipulating others. It leads us to lying about ourselves because we want to seem better than we actually are. Our own understanding lies all the time. But God's understanding says, forgive those when they wrong you because I've forgiven you. Be content in every circumstance, for what you see is not what I see, and I have promised you that I will provide, Have grace for yourself, because you're going to need it, because you're human. Hold your tongue. Don't speak without getting all the information. Be patient with those who don't know as much as you or not as far along as you. Careful how you act, because our own understanding is limited, it's one-sided, it's selfish. It can only see like within 5 feet in front of us. But God sees all. We can trust him. So, trust in God with all your heart, the very center of you. Everything that you do flows out of your heart. If it's not centered in God, you will be restless. Lean not on your own understanding. What are you leaning on? What perspective are you looking at things at? And then acknowledge him in all your ways. Acknowledge God in all your ways. Every single time I would read this as a kid, I would, for a day straight, every decision that I made, I would pray first. I would wake up and I'd be like, Lord, should I brush my teeth this morning? No? Okay. Lord, should I have cereal? Should I have Cheerios or Raisin Bran? And I thought that that's what it meant. Lord, I'm acknowledging you in all of my ways. You have free reign over every decision that I make. And then when I asked him about cereal, he didn't seem to answer. And I was confused because I'm like, Lord, you asked me to do this, but I'm not hearing anything. And I think that it comes from a misunderstanding of what acknowledge actually means. What does it actually mean to acknowledge God in all your ways? Here at Valley Forge, we have a special way of acknowledging people, depending on whether or not you want to talk to them, right? So you're walking down the hallway, and you see someone you don't necessarily want to talk to. How do you acknowledge them? It's like, you don't say anything, right? You just say, I don't want to carry on this conversation. You see someone that you really don't want to talk to, what do? You go through the student center instead of the Anvil, so you don't have to talk to them, right? And you see someone that you love and that you really want to talk to, you run up to them and you give them a hug, right? That's what we think acknowledging is. And sometimes, or maybe you don't give them a hug. Sorry, I don't know. Some of you aren't that people. I'm not, actually. But so we think that acknowledging them is just kind of like recognizing their presence, right? So sometimes we think that to acknowledge God in your life means, Lord, like praying, Lord, I acknowledge you today. I acknowledge you in this circumstance. And just like, you can say that and you can mean it, and that's fine. But I think that what this passage is trying to say actually goes a lot deeper. If you look at the Hebrew that's used, the word here for acknowledge, some translations say submit to him in all your ways. It actually means to intimately know. Acknowledge God in all your ways. Intimately know God in everything that you do. Do you know that friend that you have that without even speaking, you can make eye contact with, and you know exactly what they're thinking? And you know what you're going to do because of it. Or sometimes you say the exact same thing as them at the same time. Me and Scott were amazing at charades because of this. He wouldn't even have to say anything or do anything, and I'd be like, Rice Krispies. I would just know. It's like we could read each other's minds. It's like we're twins, but separated by 18 months. But you just know, right? You get to know someone really well, and after a while, you kind of understand their preferences. Like, for instance, that person doesn't like a hug when I see them, so I'm not going to run up to them and hug them, right? You understand how it works, and you kind of act as a result of that knowledge, maybe without even knowing it, without even doing it intentionally. You're acting out of a knowledge of who they are. And at that point, it doesn't become legalistic. Like, imagine if you had a friend who's like, hi, in order to be my friend, here's everything that I like and I don't like, and just follow this list of preferences, and then we can be friends. That would be impossible. I would never be friends with them because I would forget something on the list, right? But the more time I spend with one of my friends, the more I begin to learn their preferences. So, acknowledge God in all your ways. What does that mean? Get to know him. Like, really know him, and set your heart, the center of your being, to know him, and set his understanding as higher than your own. And say, I make that a priority. I will submit, and I know that I can trust it. In all my ways, know him. I found this quote that I want to read to you from an article on Desiring God. It's John Piper's website, so credit, it's not me. It says this: personal knowledge of God ensues from risking oneself to obey the specific teachings that pertain to all sorts of human behavior in full reliance on God to keep his promises coupled with them. Risking oneself. to keep God's promises, to keep the things that he says. You have to know what he's asking. He tells us in his word. Sometimes we have to learn by reading the Bible and meditating on it and letting it soak into us. And sometimes we learn from past experience where, God, you really came through for me there, so I trust you. I know that I can trust you going forward. But we have to trust him. We have to have the center of our being set on God, or we'll be restless. I can tell you from personal experience, you'll be restless unless you're centered in who God is. And I know that this isn't necessarily as easy as it sounds. The last part of the verse says, "And he will make your paths straight." He will make your paths straight. I hope that you can see that by now the emphasis of this passage is not on what your path looks like. A Portuguese proverb, actually, that I found, is really cool. It says, God writes straight with crooked lines. What you think as being straight to God might not be straight. He has a way, and he knows. And I know that you can't see it right now, but he will make your path straight. The emphasis on he. He will be with you. Rely on him with all your heart, and he will be with you. As we close, I'm going to have the worship team come on up. And I invite you guys to spend some time in the next couple minutes centering your heart on who God is. And just asking him to help you trust him, to help you leave behind the worry and the doubt that you might be facing right now, to set your heart on something greater than yourself and your circumstances. Because I know that right now there are some of you who feel like you're in the dark about things. You don't know what your future holds. I know that some of you feel like you failed and you don't know how to move forward, but you have to trust him. His grace is enough. And I know that there are some who maybe have experienced extreme loss and you don't know how to cope or how to move forward. And you have to trust him from the very center of your being, leaning not on your own understanding or on what you can see. I want to encourage you to pray this type of prayer as you seek God. And one author that I was reading again as I was preparing for this, he said that when we address God, a powerful way to pray for yourself is to pray whatever it takes kind of prayers. And when I first say that, you might be thinking, whatever it takes, God, I'm going to trust you. Whatever it takes, I will learn who you are. And that's not what this is. It's whatever it takes, God, you teach me. Whatever it takes, you teach me what it means to trust you. Because maybe you know that you don't right now, because you feel that restlessness in your heart and that unsettledness. But when you ask him to do it for you, and you ask him to come in, and him to comfort you and guide you, he will. So Lord, whatever it takes, as the worship team plays, just pray this prayer. The altars are open if you want prayer. If you need to go to class, Dr. Douglas will dismiss soon. But whatever it takes, God, help us to trust you. Help us to trust you. Thank you.